It is now my pleasure to introduce Julie Hill, who is an outreach specialist, a horticulture outreach specialist for Rock and Walworth counties, and her presentation on Beyond Bird Feeders. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Anne. Just making sure you can see the slide okay. Okay, great. Thanks. So thanks, Tim and Anne, for helping moderate today, and welcome everyone. My name is Julie, and we're going to talk about gardening for birds here. So we do have a resource handout, and we can drop that link into the chat. So links that I'm going to be referring to and additional resources are going to be linked in that handout, so you can take a look at that later too. So we'll link that into the chat, and you'll have access to it when we link it through the recording too. So let's get started here. What's the big deal about birds? Birds play countless roles in healthy ecosystems and in helping humans. So preserving bird diversity really helps everyone. Birds provide ecosystem services such as seed dispersal and pollination and pest control. Seed dispersal is huge. More than half of the plant species on Earth rely on animals, like birds, to disperse their seeds. And the loss of these seed dispersal mechanisms, the loss of birds and mammals, really inhibits the ability of plants to be able to adapt and expand their ranges. And we know that birds eat a lot of insects, which we'll talk about later, but we also know that birds of prey are really great control agents of pests. So in its lifetime, a barn owl can eat more than 11,000 mice that would have consumed 13 tons of crops. So, and go ahead and thank those turkey vultures later for the sanitation services that they provide. Birds provide us entertainment, a connection to nature. They're fun to watch at our feeders. They're a mood booster. And what we're really realizing now is the interconnectedness of these living systems. So the decline of one species can have impacts that ripple across entire ecosystems, and even in ways that we might not have imagined or knew before. There was a study published in Science in 2019 that reported that overall bird diversity has declined by nearly 30%. So that is almost 3 billion birds gone in our lifetimes. The study showed losses in every type of habitat. And in particular, common backyard birds, these birds that you might see at your feeders, they've been documented with a 25 to 30% loss as well. So supporting big conservation policies and efforts and laws are super important. They're great, they're needed, but each of us in our yards and our communities and the neighborhoods that we live in, we can have a positive influence here. The causes of bird declines, you probably can guess, similar causes to the loss of biodiversity, habitat loss, habitat fragmentation, declining water quality, invasive species, declining food sources. And those outdoor cats, they kill 2.6 billion birds annually. So even declawed cats are quite apt at knocking birds down. So if we want to have birds in our yard and we were letting our cat out, that is kind of opposing forces there. So let's take a look at how we can help birds in our own area. The elements of a bird-friendly garden are food, cover, and nest sites. So keep these three things in mind as you look around your garden or your yard or your neighborhood. We're going to spend the most of our time talking about food. So what does bird food look like? Maybe a bird feeder comes to mind, or several bird feeders. And sure, many birds do include seeds in their diet during the months in which seeds are plentiful. But there's only a few groups, like our finches and our doves, that are able to complete their entire life cycle on seeds alone. And not all birds are feeder birds. You might have seen this in your own yard. You might hear more birds or see other birds, but not all of them are coming down to the feeder. Fruits are another great source of food. But again, no North American bird species can make a living only eating fruits. So that leaves us with, drum roll, everybody, insects. Insects are really rich sources of protein and fats for birds. They're extraordinarily high in protein. They have up to twice as much protein, pound for pound, as does beef. They also have these organs in their abdomens called fat bodies. They're really high, really rich in high energy lipids. And birds need this high protein and fat for the muscle tone and energy. So the young birds need these high protein sources, and so do adults. And so they'll take an insect over seeds or fruit almost every time. And arthropods are really important too. You'll see this wren here. It has a harvestman, not a spider, but other arthropods like spiders and these harvestmen are important as well as insects. So here's where I'm going to try to impress you with a little bit of statistics. 96% of birds depend entirely on insect protein to feed their young, especially caterpillars. So even the birds that are feeding at your feeders every day and eating seeds, they need insects, especially caterpillars, to feed their young. And the abundance of flying insects has been linked to fledgling success of insect-eating birds. Here's another amazing one. Chickadees need to collect between 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to feed one clutch of babies, so one nest of babies. This is hundreds and hundreds of caterpillars that they have to collect every day to feed their young. And not just insects, like we mentioned, other arthropods like spiders are really important. Spiders make up half of the prey items that wrens feed their young. So I think I made a case that insects are pretty important for birds and arthropods too. So let's talk about how we can do some gardening to provide food for, insects, not birds. A little bait and switch there. You need to have insects if you want to have songbirds in your yard. And the best way to do this is with these following tips here. We'll talk about right plant, right place, incorporating native plants, removing non-native species, increasing the diversity of your plants or of your yard so that you have resources to last all throughout the year, and reducing pesticides and using responsibly. So this right plant, right place, I'm sure you've heard of this before. It's really about understanding your site and the plant's growing conditions, and it requires research before you purchase and plant. So consider how much space you have available, what kind of light you have available, the soil conditions, especially things like drainage, maybe how much maintenance, how much care is needed for the plant, or how much time you have. And remember, plants need a lot more care to get established. You want you to choose plants that are best for your yard or for your space. Look at the growing conditions of those plants you want to plant. You know, how much light do they need? What type of soil do they need? How much space are they going to take up? How big are they going to get? Do they need a lot of care every year? And this example here shown is a white baneberry, and I show it because it's edible to wildlife, but it's really toxic to humans. So if you have children or grandchildren, just neighborhood kids around that might be sampling some of this, we wouldn't want to plant this in that type of yard, even though it's good for wildlife. So we want to choose plants that are going to help boost habitat for insects like caterpillars and others. So by providing these food sources for those insects throughout the different stages of their life cycle, you help provide bird food. So I'm going to give you some resources. Again, these are linked in that resource handout. We can drop that link into the chat again. These are some great resources to help you get started on this research that I'm advising you to do. There is this publication, this Wisconsin's Best Native Plants for Attracting Birds. It's a little booklet, and then there's an insert about the plants that can attract birds, and there's lots of different categories there. It does describe what birds the plants will attract. Just remember, you'll need to know the growing conditions of those plants too that you might want to plant. You need to look up a little bit more information about the plants. This Birdscaping in the Midwest book has a lot of great information, and it's available from your library, or you can buy it online too. Another really great resource. The Audubon Society is another fantastic resource. They actually have a native plants database, so you can type in your zip code and it will give you lists of plants of what birds those plants could attract. And talking about caterpillars, we can look at the types of plants that are hosts for caterpillars. So Penn State Extension, again, this is linked in the handout, has a list here. The list goes on. This is just a sample of additional host plants that help feed those caterpillars that will eventually turn into butterflies or be eaten as bird food. So we emphasize a lot about native plants. You might have heard that with a lot of different things. What's the big deal about native plants? Well, plant-eating insects are specialists, and they feed on one or just a few related plant species. So these native plants and our native insects, and therefore our native birds, our wild birds, have co-evolved so that the timing of their life cycles match up. So for this reason, native plants are more likely to provide a mix of foods, just the right size, just the right kind of nutrition, and just when the birds need them. And birds in turn provide a really critical service for the plants by eating the insects that could harm them. They're really active insect predators, especially during nesting. when those young birds need all that insect protein for their growth. Now, with invasive or non-native species, you might see birds using certain shrubs or trees or things like that. Maybe they're using them for cover or for a nest. But really, if that's all there is available, they have to use it. However, in thinking about these food sources for birds, non-native plants do not provide as much food as our native plants do. There's been research to show that native plants do contain higher numbers of insects and other arthropods versus those non-native plants. These native insects have evolved to circumvent their native plants' defenses. So when we bring in non-natives or exotics, our native insects, they don't have the enzymes, they don't have the capability to digest those non-native plants. And birds nesting in non-native vegetation are more likely to fall victim to predators because there's a different structure. Sometimes there's thorns where our native ones doesn't have thorns, or vice versa, or the thorns are a different size, or they're longer or more stout. So there's some different things there in structure compared to native plants that can affect how predators might be able to access those birds. Let's talk about how diverse resources can feed birds all year long. So birds depend on insects and seeds, fruit, berries throughout the year, including winter. And by encouraging diversity, you can offer these resources all year long. So we've already talked a lot about insects. I think I made a case for insects here, but all different stages of insects can provide food for birds throughout the year. So just some examples here, birds can search for hibernating insects in the bark of trees, in leaf litter or in brush piles, in these standing dead trees called snags. I'll advise that only consider leaving those snags if there's no threat to safety of people or structures in your yard. But if it's out of the way and it's not going to cause any harm, that dead tree can provide a lot of insects in there. Some insects spend the winter in the seed heads of wildflowers or in galls like this goldenrod stem gall. So you can leave your perennial plants standing throughout the winter. So this fall, don't cut down all those perennial plants. They provide some winter interest, and those seed heads can help provide food throughout the winter. Leave it a little messy to help feed your birds. Seeds like acorns and pine seeds and those seeds from the wildflowers are really good food sources. Berries are another source. There's the northern hackberry or red cedar have berries that persist through the winter. And just remember, there are some species of these trees and shrubs that produce berries. You might need a male and a female plant, like winterberry needs both male and female plants to produce berries. So again, if you do that research ahead of time, you'll be able to purchase and plant plants that will do the best. Okay, let's talk about reducing pesticides and using responsibly. Pesticide is any substance or a mixture of substances that are intended for preventing, destroying, repelling, or mitigating a pest. And there's a lot of products out there, a lot of different ingredients and lots of different products on the market. These are under our sinks, they're in our sheds, in our garages, in the services that we hire, and the marketing for these products is really, really good. So before you reach for that spray, I want you to think about these two questions here. One, what effect might that have on a non-target organism? So you purchase a product, you're trying to treat a problem. What could it impact on something else? And where do these pesticides or where do these things go after we spray them? And these products or these active ingredients, they might not be directly toxic or harmful to birds. You know, some of this stuff we don't quite know the full impact. It takes years to see the effects. So it may not be directly harmful, but remember the bigger picture here of this ecosystem. And this ecosystem could be in your container plants or a full yard or lots of acres. If you're using an insecticide, the job of an insecticide is to kill insects. But they're really not just going to kill one type of insect. And we talked a lot about how important insects are, like caterpillars, to the whole food supply for birds. And other pesticides might have detrimental effects, even if they're not directly harmful. We know that there's declines in these food supplies that are causing declines in bird populations. So if these products end up on other plants, even though we didn't mean them to, or they end up in the water supply, we're just creating a lack of food and a lack of healthy environment for our bird species. There are many ways to reduce or even eliminate pesticide use and use more responsibly. These are just the top 3 that you can start today. First, If you do have some sort of problem, something's munching on your leaves, or you're seeing spots in your yard or on a tree on leaves or something, first let's identify the problem. A pest could be anything causing a problem. Then we got to learn what to do about it, and that's where Extension can help. We have a Ask a Gardening Question line through our Extension Horticulture website that will connect you with staff and volunteers that serve your county that can help answer those questions. So first, we need to identify what the problem is and then learn about it. Do we need to do something? What's the timing of if we need to do something? And we need to adjust our expectations and our tolerance of it. Not all bugs are bad. It's okay that leaves get chewed on. That's the job of a plant, is to feed the insects. So that's its job. It's okay if the leaves are a little bit chewed on or our plants aren't quite picture magazine perfect. And here again, do your research before you buy and use any pesticide product. So read the label, and I know that can be challenging because the label on a product is usually packed in plastic and you have to pull out the 100 pages and get out the magnifying glass and read the really small print. But we need to look up all that information on the label. The label is the law. You are legally required to follow the label. The label will tell you what type of pest it treats and if it can be used on certain plants. You can go to the manufacturer's website, and you can actually look up ingredients on the National Pesticide Information Center. And I do have that linked in that handout again. So when you look up the ingredients on the National Pesticide Information Center website, it's going to give you a fact sheet. It's going to tell you about that ingredient. And it also is going to tell you what happens in the environment and how it might affect birds and other wildlife. And that's information that's usually not on the label. So it's really good to look up those active ingredients, get informed, and find out before you actually use the product. I do want to talk quickly about bird feeders. Bird feeders are great. Think of them as a supplement. Bird feeders are going to supplement the foods that are produced by nature and can help increase survival rates, especially in those really cold temperatures. But just remember, just because you're providing food doesn't mean the birds are going to stay in your yard. They're still going to migrate. They're going to still move on. They're going to do their thing. But you still can provide the supplemental foods. Look for the high quality, nutrient dense seed like black sunflower oil seeds, white proso millet, cracked corn, peanuts, Niger, all good sources. Avoid anything that has red millet or flax because those are just fillers, so it's not as high quality. We want to really avoid the human treats, so no bread, no crackers, no popcorn, things like that. To avoid those window collisions, keep your feeders either close to that window or to that house or further than 30 feet. And keep it dry and clean. And there are instructions out there, especially from the Audubon and linked in the handout about how to do that. That will really help keeping those feeders dry and clean. And water is important too. All birds, just like all animals, need water. So if you have a bird bath, great. You can also just put a shallow dish out. It doesn't have to be a bird bath. It could be just a dish that you're putting out, just no deeper than 2 or 3 inches. If you do have a bird bath, make sure it's on a sturdy pedestal, a non-slip basin surface. You do need to clean it, even in the winter. You can add some moving water. So there's these really cool little solar fountains that you can purchase and put those in there. And that kind of bubbling, moving water helps attract birds too. In the winter, you can find small heaters too for the bird bath. And if you do have some sort of pond or water source that you want over the winter, make sure you have a heater for that as well. All right, so we're going to move on to our next element of a bird-friendly yard, and that is cover. So birds need cover or shelter to help them to survive those really adverse weather conditions and escape from predators. So the more natural habitat you have, the more cover and food there is available for birds. So this is just a list of some sources of cover and shelter. You see we're trying to mimic nature here. Evergreens are a great thing to provide shelter. They can help block winds. You can put your feeders next to them. Herbaceous plants like the dead stalks of those wildflowers and grasses, they can provide cover, and we talked about how they can provide food sources too. Brush piles, maybe you have an area of your yard where you can have a brush pile, or you just construct one annually and you set it aside. That's just a deliberate pile of this woody material to provide shelter. And animals can use brush piles in the spaces within them for nesting or a little escape route or a hiding spot or a resting spot. and as well as locations to seek food. And as those brush piles break down and decompose, more insects are going to be attracted to them. And then again, more food sources there. Christmas trees, after you're done with your Christmas tree, you can put that outside. Tree cavities are great spots for cover. Again, those dead trees or snags, only if it's safe on your property, you can consider leaving it. The third element are nesting sites. So sources of nesting sites really similar to our sources of cover. I'll just point out here the natural cavities. So woodpeckers excavate holes, and that can help provide a cavity nesting for some other bird species. So again, really similar to our list of sources of cover, just having those habitat sources there for cover and nesting. And if you don't have natural cavities, that's okay. You can improve bird habitat by supplementing. You can provide these supplemental housings by nest boxes. So nest boxes are a human-made wooden structure, and it's designed to provide space for these cavity nesting birds and maybe even some other wildlife like flying squirrels. So they'll lay their eggs in there and raise their young, and they do prefer natural cavities over human-made nest boxes, but a well-constructed and well-placed nest box can provide an excellent home. The number and kinds of nest boxes you put up in your yard really just kind of depend on the kinds of birds in your neighborhood and the habitats you have, the size of bird territory. So birds are territorial. They're going to drive away birds of their own species, but tolerate other species. And different dimensions of those nest boxes will attract different species. So there's lots of resources out there to help you with how to construct a nest box and where to place it. So we'll just kind of reiterate here on how to be a bird-friendly gardener. Remember the ripple effect. What you do does matter. So follow these tips and you will increase the bird diversity in your own yard or neighborhood. Again, I want to thank everybody for being here. I think we have some time for questions, and we'll put the link to that resource handout in the chat.
Thank you, Julie. A lot of really great information there, especially on how to keep our wildlife safe. We did get a few wildlife questions here. So we did drop our wildlife specialist's info in the chat as well. His name is David Drake. If you have specific wildlife questions on birds or other critters in your yard, he is the expert to contact, and he's very responsive and will provide you with all those answers. As far as our talk today, we do have a few questions here, Julie, in particular concerning pesticides and other applications we might apply to our plant material. One in particular here, when applying neem oil, what kind of impact would that have on our birds, if any?
Great question. I know a lot of people like to turn to neem oil. I would first consider what are you using the neem oil for, and if it's really a worthy treatment. I don't know the impact it may or may not have on birds or other insects. That's something that we could certainly look into. Some of the stuff with the impact on wildlife, it hasn't been thoroughly researched yet either. So I wouldn't just grab the neem oil as a safe thing. Things that are labeled organic, that doesn't mean that they're safe. Again, it depends on what you're trying to do. What are you trying to treat? What's the problem? What are you trying to achieve here?
Yes, that's a reasonable question to ask. I'm not sure if you're going to have the answer to this question, Julie, or not, or if this is one for Dr. Brian Huddleston. This person recently had an eco tree company apply a spray to control rhizosphere and needle cast on a large spruce tree. Do you know of any impacts that treatment might have on birds?
Again, we'd have to see what the active ingredient was in that treatment. We could certainly connect with Dr. Huddleston about maybe what are the fungicides ingredients, and then look those ingredients up on that National Pesticide Information Center that I shared. Again, it really comes down to the active ingredient. There's lots and lots of products out there, but we need to look at what the ingredient is and consider, how it was used. So the fungicide itself is going to treat fungus. Are there secondary impacts? I think there's still research happening on those. It's not likely to directly impact insects and birds, but we could certainly, again, I think it comes down to the active ingredient and seeing what it was.
Yeah, I think I have another question here about deer repellents, and I think the answer would be very similar to that as well, just really determining those active ingredients. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I have a question here. Mealworms. What do you know about mealworms? They sound like bird food to me.
They're great bird food, great bird food. So a mealworm is the larval form of a mealworm beetle. So it's a larva. So similar to a caterpillar, that's a larva. You can definitely put mealworms out. That's another, I know you can purchase those just like you would purchase birdseed. A great form of insect protein for birds.
Do you happen to know this person is using cayenne pepper as an alternative to other liquid or chemical deer repellents? Do you have any info on if
I,
that's safe for birds?
I have not seen anything about cayenne and
I haven't
birds.
either. If it works, great. I would assume it's probably safe for birds. Let's see here.
I see one here about a comment with the trees and shrubs away from windows to reduce window strikes.
Yes.
We shouldn't be planting trees and shrubs next to a house anyway. They probably should be about at least 6 feet away, maybe more like 15 feet away, depending on the tree. You know, smaller shrubs could be planted a little bit closer, but we really got to also think about the placement of those trees themselves or those shrubs themselves. So just a comment, yeah, we don't want to plant things right next to the house anyway. And there's a comment here about reduction of outdoor lighting at night during migration times. And I know the Audubon has a lot of great information on that too. Their website has a ton of information. So lots of great resources there.
Yeah, definitely. Again, back to chemical applications for one last question here, potentially. What do you know about the impacts of herbicides
Yeah, good
or
question.
potential impacts?
So an herbicide is a chemical. It's a type of pesticide that kills plants. So you might be using it to control a weed or some other plant that you don't want around. Here again, this is where we might not know the direct toxicity to a bird. So it may not be directly harmful to a bird, but it could have impact on other things that touch that plant that it was sprayed on, or if it ended up on another plant that you didn't try to spray, but just ended up there. So there could be some secondary impacts. Again, this is where I'm going to refer to look at the active ingredient and look it up on the National Pesticide Information Center, because they do list out impacts in the environment and potential impacts to other wildlife or other species. Again, you know, not all pesticides are necessarily bad if we're using them correctly. A targeted approach, making sure we've tried other methods too. There's a lot of other things that we can do, either in combination with pesticides or, you know, trying them first, and pesticides or chemicals are our last resort. So some questionable about, I think they are doing some research on direct toxicity, but also kind of keeping in mind that big picture that they could harm the food sources or other things that could impact other animals like birds.
So potentially one last quick question here. For those of us who grow fruit trees and berries, how do you suggest balancing harvest and insect and bird support?
Oh, for apples, I see the question.
Yeah.
Apples, plums, raspberries, gooseberries. Great question. Something I haven't really thought about, but could you plant a little extra? Maybe you don't harvest everything. I know on some of those things, the birds and other animals might get to it first. You know, but if we have really diverse landscapes, there's going to be resources to support the insects and birds. So if we can increase the diversity and, you know, maybe we're planting a little extra for the birds or some for ourselves, you know, and keeping in mind how we're treating those fruit crops as well, you know, using maybe some non-chemical methods to help support the insects and birds and other wildlife. That probably didn't answer the question, but that's
Well,
what I got.
thank you for your great presentation today, Julie. That's all we have time for today. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all our questions today. If you have additional questions, you can contact us at our website. We do appreciate your feedback on our evaluation survey. As the webinar closes, you'll be redirected to that survey. We appreciate your feedback, and we hope you will join us again for our next upcoming webinars. You can find our upcoming events and recording to this webinar on the Extension Horticultural website. That's hort.extension.wisc.edu. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Julie.